Good evening, and welcome to the regularly scheduled City Council meeting of December 18th, 2018. This meeting is now called to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for the invocation given by Mayor Pro Tem Matt Albrecht.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dear God, it is written that if anyone lacks wisdom, they should ask for it from above, and we are in need of your wisdom, so we ask that you would grant it to us this evening. We also ask that you would grant your peace and your joy and your love, especially in this season, but all year round. Grant it to us in this community, that we all may flourish in every way. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Roll call, please.
Mayor Woolley.
Here.
Councilmember Aris.
Here.
Councilmember Milan.
Here.
Councilmember Moffitt.
Here.
Councilmember Albrecht.
Here.
The first item on the agenda is consideration of approving the following consent agenda. This week, the consent agenda includes minutes of a special city council meeting held on Tuesday, November 27th, as presented, minutes of the special city council meeting held on Thursday, November 28th, and minutes of the regular city council meeting held on Tuesday, December 4th, as presented.
Mayor, I move the consent agenda be approved as listed.
Questions, corrections?
There's one correction I have for the Tuesday, December 4th meeting under agenda item number 11. It says Councilmember Moffitt stated that she was concerned that we are paying a contract employee an hourly rate for only being in the office 3 days a week. My concern was about paying a contract employee to work from home, which I understand has since been addressed, but that's what my concern was, about paying a contract employee who is being paid hourly to work from home.
Okay.
Do we need to amend the motion, Mr. Smith?
You can, excuse me, as listed, as amended. Excuse me.
So do we need a new motion?
Need a new motion.
Yeah.
So, Madam Mayor, I move that the consent agenda be approved as listed and amended.
Support.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Aris.
Yes.
Councilmember Milan.
Yes.
Councilmember Moffitt.
Yes.
Councilmember Albrecht.
Yes.
Mayor Woolley.
Yes. And the ayes have it, and the motion carries. The next item on the agenda is presentation of the 2018 Holiday Decoration Beautification Awards. And I believe we have Ms. Lean House from our Parks and Recreation Department here to do the honors.
Is it on? Every year we have beautification awards. People can call in houses that they see around town that they really like the way they're decorated. Our Parks and Rec Advisory Board also goes out and looks, they each are assigned a section of town, and they also pick houses, and then we go out. And hopefully the lights are on the night that we go out, and they kind of score all the houses. We had over 30 houses this year, and the top 5 point getters were the ones that we give awards to and recognize tonight. But we also wanted to recognize some of the businesses. If you've driven around Clawson, you can see that Old Port is very lit up this year. It looks lovely. And wood piles decorated, and the taverns decorated, and on Rochester Road, I think it's called the Cristal Group. They've got theirs all done up too. So it really makes it beautiful when you come through our city. And so we're thankful to those businesses and to all of you residents who take the time to put the lights up. If you get time over the holidays, just drive around town. You can just drive and look down a street, and if it's all lit up, go on down and see what it looks like. So. Not everybody could be here tonight of our top 5, but we have Courtney and Bill Peach. They're over on 289 Park Drive. If you want to come up here, their house is one of our top ones. Courtney and Julie Price were not able to be here this evening. Margaret Conroy, 499 Allen. David Ziegelen at 650 Bowers, and Diane and Bill Mitchelson at 103 Gladwin. If you want to come up. Courtney and Julie Price's house is 668 West Baker. If you could all stay up here for a minute so we can. No, not here. Ziegelen, there we go.
Get a picture.
If you want to stay up here just for a minute, that'd be great.
Get a photo.
I like that.
If we could just get a picture of all of you, that'd be great.
Get in there tight.
Thank you very much.
There was scheduled to be a presentation by State Rep. Mr. Howerlach. However, he is still stuck in Lansing, so he will not be here to give us an update this evening. Agenda item number 8 is consideration of a resolution amending the purchase price for a new sewer camera system as originally approved at the November 1st, 2016 City Council meeting. I believe we have Matt Hodges from our Director of the Department of Public Works here to speak on this issue.
Good evening, Madam Mayor. I'm here to answer any questions you may have regarding the amendment of the purchase price.
This was an item that we'd approved back, and it was part of the package from what I recall.
It was, I believe it was part of the original quote that we had taken out, and that's what lowered the price down. And now it's been 2 years since then, and it's about $800 extra from what the original price was approved, not to exceed.
So we're just approving an extra, what was it, $500, $581.89. That was more than the original budget approval for the purchase.
I believe so.
That's correct. Mayor, the amount is slightly over the city manager's requirement as well, but since it did exceed the amount approved by the council, we thought it best to cover both bases by just bringing it to the council and having you all say your blessing on it.
Would you spend a little bit of time, Mr. Hodges, and explain what the importance of this piece is for our residents?
And speak closely to the microphone. I can't hear you. There we go.
Is that better?
A little bit.
Better.
Yeah.
Okay. When we're cleaning the sewers, we use the high-pressure water nozzle to clean it. After we started the program, our engineering firm requested that the nozzle be within 3 to 6 feet of the camera at all times. When you're pulling the nozzle back, it's pushing the water the direction the camera is moving, and it creates a suction. It dewaters the pipe, so you get a clear 360-degree view of the pipe. The problem being is if you have to move the nozzle forward, the operator does not know where that camera is, and they have the potential of damaging the camera system. With this, they know exactly where it's at all times. In real time, they're seeing exactly what the camera operator is looking at. So it's almost like an insurance policy for the camera. If we damage the camera, we're going to have to repair it. And without this piece of equipment, we would have to repair it and incur those expenses and still not have that piece of equipment that would tell us exactly where that camera is in relation to the Vector Jet nozzle.
Thank you.
Do we have to wait for a motion for questions?
Yes, please.
Your Honor, I move the resolution amending the purchase price amount of the $1,555 for the new sewer camera system as originally approved at the November 1st, 2016 City Council meeting, CM 11-157-16, be amended to state the amount not to exceed $155,581.89.
Support.
Were there any questions?
There are. So this was approved in 2016.
Correct.
Is there a reason it wasn't purchased in 2016?
They took it out from the original quote, thinking we could use handheld radios that all the DPW employees use at the same time, which is not effective operating the system that way. You
Who's
have
they?
the 4 operators on the camera.
Okay.
There's 2 in the camera truck, 2 on the Vector jet. If they don't hear the radio or if there's other radio traffic, they're going to ram the nozzle into the camera lens. The only way they can prevent that is to stop the camera immediately and try reversing it as fast as possible.
So when this was approved in 2016, it was put on the budget at that time.
I'd have
Was
to
that
look at the
money-
original quote bid from Houston Galveston to see if it was actually in their pricing. But I believe when Doheny gave us the bid quote of $155,000, I believe it was included in that.
Well, my question is, was it held in our budget and that money not spent? Was that money allocated somewhere? Or are we spending money that was allocated in 16 and is not available to us right now without going over budget? Is my question.
That I can't answer to, but I do not believe so. I don't believe it was spent.
So when we
I believe there in 2016 there was a surplus in the water sewer fund, and that is what.
Yeah, typically in these situations, what you would do is it would come from the fund balance in the water sewer department.
Yeah, there was over $1 million in cash
In other words, they
reserves.
underspent, and so they carried it forward, so it's being carried as a surplus.
So do we know for sure it was carried forward?
I would strongly suspect, knowing my predecessor, yes, it was, and it's being retained, because you can't, you don't commingle money from your utilities with the general fund. So unlike the general fund, when you close it out, any surplus goes into the fund balance. The same thing happens in the utilities. It goes to the water sewer fund balance, and you just draw from that just the same as you would in the general fund.
So is there any reason to have a vote before we're sure that that's the circumstance?
I guess my feeling is that we intended it to be part of the package, and we intended on it being able to provide a safe and efficient manner in which to do that. And unfortunately, I don't think that, for me, I don't know that we can, I would say no to the purchase, even if that money was earmarked somewhere else, just because that the department needs that piece of equipment so it doesn't get damaged. I mean, I'm disappointed that it wasn't delivered and at the time that they did it, but I'm grateful that they're addressing it before the camera is damaged.
So is the camera being used up until now in a potentially dangerous manner?
It was.
Okay.
Because they said that there's actually 14 people all speaking on the same channel that they're trying to communicate with this Vector jet thing.
Yeah, this is fairly expensive equipment. You don't want to have to replace the lenses and stuff because it's used in a horrible environment. You got to remember it's in a water and sewer line, mainly sewer lines, and there's a lot of bad things that can get it. You don't want getting inside your electronics.
Well, and as a council, I was part of council at that time. We were committed to making sure that we were diligent in addressing our sewer systems and
Right.
and getting our own piece of equipment here, partially so that we could do it on our own time frame, as well as after the Great Flood, you could not rent them anywhere because they are years back ordered for other cities to be able to do that. And so we felt there was a benefit in having that piece of equipment here in the city of Clawson. Any other questions or comments? Roll call, please.
Councilmember Moffett?
Yes.
Councilmember Albrecht?
Yes.
Mayor Woolley?
Yes,
Councilmember Aris?
Yes.
Councilmember Milan?
Yes.
and the ayes have it, and the motion carries. Thank you very much for your time,
Thank you.
Mr. Hodges. The next item on the agenda is consideration of approving a resolution authorizing the implementation of recommendations necessary to receive redevelopment-ready community certification from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, or MEDC. As you may or may not know, the MEDC came and did a presentation here at City Council chambers on December 4th. with a representative, and they gave us the result of our baseline report. The report indicated which best practices the city was meeting, as well as those that we are not. The MEDC requires that the city reaffirms their commitment to engage in the RRC program by passing the attached resolution to proceed within 30 days of the baseline report presentation. The city will continue implementing the necessary recommendations in order to achieve RRC certifications. I believe that Ms. Steck is here if we had any questions in regard to the process from our Economic Development Department.
Good evening, all. Yes, I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
So the other question I had in reviewing the report they gave, they mentioned some specific benchmarks that we were supposed to meet, different things, Q1 of 19, Q2 of 19, that sort of thing. Is that the time frame that you're working on to get those completed?
That is the time frame in which I would like to work on, yes. I mean, it's helpful. I find it helpful for me to have deadlines and target dates, so that's what I'm going to be operating under, yes.
And I believe I'd asked the representative, as long as we're making progress, we don't get kicked out of the program. That
Exactly.
we just need to be moving forward with all of our items.
Yes, being diligent in our activities, yes.
Madam Mayor, I move resolution authorizing the implementation of recommendations necessary to receive redevelopment-ready community certification from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation be approved.
Support.
Last comments or questions? Roll call, please.
Councilmember Albrecht?
Yes.
Mayor Woolley?
Yes.
Councilmember Ayers?
Yes.
Councilmember Malone?
Yes.
Councilmember Moffett?
Yes.
And the motion carries.
Thank you
Thank
very
you very
much.
much for your
Thank
time,
you.
Ms. Steck. The next item on the agenda is consideration of approving the selection of a new city planning service provider for the city of Clawson. On Tuesday, December 11th, the Planning Commission discussed the planning service proposals and supplemental information submitted by Giffords Webster and Beckett Rader. Representatives from each firm were present to answer any questions that arose, which is very nice. Overall, the Planning Commission was pleased with the proposals and responses by the two respective firms. The consensus was that the city is very lucky to be in a position to have two exceptionally qualified and well-respected firms interested in providing planning services. At this time, after narrowing down the finalists to the top two, it's time to make a final selection to have a start in 2019. I did want to read the summary of opinions by Mr. Albus, the Building Department Director, that the Planning Commission discussed the planning service proposals and supplemental information submitted by Giffords Webster and Beckett Rader. The Planning Commission was provided with video links to the first and second interviews of both firms to assist with the discussion. Representatives from each firm were also present to answer any potential questions that arose, and restates that the Planning Commission was pleased with the proposals. There were some discussions on the proximity of the firms to the city and costs associated with the proposed services. The consensus was that the city is very lucky to be in a position to have two exceptionally qualified and well-respected firms interested in providing planning services. The Planning Commission is optimistic that whichever firm is selected will be high caliber, forward-thinking, and will foster the continued advancement of Clawson. Have a motion to discuss this?
Do we make a motion to discuss it? Madam Mayor?
Or do you want to just make a selection and we'll vote on that?
Madam, Your Honor, I move that Giffords and Webster be selected as the new city planning services provider for the city of Clawson, and to direct the city attorney and administration to draft the official contract for approval at the next city council meeting.
Support.
Any further questions, discussion?
I'd just like to know why we go from, we have two firms to all of a sudden we make a motion for Giffords Webster. Just curious.
You can say no, and then we could do it differently.
It just seems like there's no input this way, that's all. And I know, my day job is an engineering firm, and I know I've investigated both firms, and they both have really great records. I think we do well with either one. Just for the process, I'm just curious why no conversation, and then this is the thing. Even though I probably would lean towards them as well, just asking. Just trying to follow the
I think
procedure.
that we had had our discussion at the meeting prior and then wanted some additional input from the planning commission.
Okay.
And just to add on to that, I did watch the Planning Commission meeting where they had a discussion of it. I know that Melissa Proust did a breakdown of the cost and thought that they were comparable, and that was one of the concerns. So by her analysis, and I understand she's in the industry, she said that she thought that when you break it down line item to line item, the costs were comparable. Everyone liked the PowerPoint presentation that they used and the presentation style. There was discussion of the proximity of the organizations to our city and how one's more accessible than the other. So it was based on having watched the Planning Commission meeting and the conversations that we had here prior to that. So.
And having discussion after a motion is, in my opinion, just as helpful as prior to the motion. But I appreciated Giffords Webster's imaginative approach to some issues that were to be found in the site plan. I think their suggestions for our TCO issue that we presented to them. Within that, they actually refer to the TCO ordinance, which I appreciated. And they provided a lot of suggestions up front that came afterwards from the other firm. Those are some of my reasonings. I appreciated the layout of the Beckett-Rader review, but I think the presentation of that review was much more dynamic from Giffords Webster.
And my experience was with Giffords Webster when they came here and were working on our GDA master plan, and they did really listen to the community. I like the fact that they've got some great training resources so that we can start doing annual training for anybody that wants to be on the Planning Commission, Zoning Board. And so some people get some additional resources on what to look for, and I'm just really excited for that to happen.
I was impressed with both of them myself. I did a wonderful presentation for everything that they came out, with coming out twice on it, and I liked the Giffords Webster. They are closer too, I believe. They're right down the street here, so which helps a lot because a lot of the other ones were quite a ways away from here, and if we needed assistance right away, we couldn't actually get it as fast as we could out of the Giffords bunch. So.
Were we at roll call? Or were we at a... Mr. Smith?
Sure. Mayor Woolley?
Yes.
Councilmember Aris?
Yes.
Councilmember Milan?
Yes.
Councilmember Moffett?
Yes.
Councilmember Albrecht?
Yes.
The ayes have it, and Giffords Webster will be our new planning services. So Mr. Smith and Mr. Haberman and Mr. Kingsup, please start the ball rolling and
I will.
getting those processes
Well,
taken
Madam
care
Mayor.
of.
Are we sending anything to McKenna for all they've done for all the years?
Mr. Smith sent them a very nice personal letter. The next item on the agenda is consideration of the list of bills.
Madam Mayor, pay the bills.
Support.
Were there any questions on the bills? Roll call, please.
Councilmember Aris?
Yes.
Councilmember Milan?
Yes.
Councilmember Moffett?
Yes.
Councilmember Albrecht?
Yes.
Mayor Woolley?
Yes. And the bills are going to be paid. The next item on the agenda is the city attorney's report. Mr. Kingsup?
Madam Mayor, I'll go through the plethora of items that are before you. First is the chicken ordinance, a popular ordinance that came before you in hearings you had on it and discussed it a number of times. I want to thank Heather Peltonen for helping me on this. She has a degree in agricultural worked for the large entity dealing with chickens, is familiar with them. I gave her an opportunity to review the ordinance. She gave me some comments on that, and also thought that the management of waste in the ordinance was good. She wanted to know how it would be enforced, and I think that would have to be done administratively by someone who's trained in that, at least aware of how waste management should occur regarding chickens. She questioned the number at 4. I put that in because there were 4 before, and that's a reasonable number, I guess, not knowing anything about chickens. But the ordinance is a little different. It was geared more not toward the prohibition aspect of it as much as it was toward allowing it and being aware of the consideration that's given to chickens in this day and age, as opposed to 50 years ago when they were barnyard animals, dinner table items, and commercial items for the sale of eggs. And that's no longer the case as it deals in residential districts. So I tried to put a different input on it and put the responsibility really on the owner to be aware of what they're doing and what responsibilities they have. So it's your call regarding where you want to go forward on this. You have the details and the information. We had a good resource for us, and it's in your hands. That's all I can say.
Questions?
So do we discuss the content of the ordinance now, or do we put it on the agenda for next time as it stands with, what do you want us to do?
That's a good question. In that regard, I think you might want to prognosticate for a while and have the ordinance on the agenda at a later date. I say that also because there are a lot of things on your plate right now. And going into the beginning months of next year, there will be a lot of issues as well. So I would suggest that you maybe not table it, but have this matter referred back to council. And I will work with administration on trying to locate the appropriate date in which you might want to hear it.
And I know that it was also, I saw it before I popped over here, someone had posted on Facebook, so that gives the community an opportunity to comment on what we have and revise, I guess, and go forward from there.
If I can interject at that point, I haven't looked at Facebook on that, but I would suggest that if you suggest going forward, that perhaps the report and the proposed ordinance be put on Facebook.
I think what someone did is they just went on the city website and looked at the council packet, which is available to the whole world, and found that piece and PDF'd it and stuck it up there. So
All right. Well, if
that's
they
how, I
did,
mean, they may
then
have
they've done it.
they may have taken everything else, but I just happened to see that someone, I didn't even open it. They just said, the post said, this is the ordinance that's going to be discussed this evening on chickens, and they might have had all your stuff, other stuff, but it was taken from the council packet, which is available.
Mr. Smith, could we get this up on the website as well as Facebook?
Sure.
Under the
Now
appropriate
that we have it, yes.
area and on the website and Facebook and all the appropriate other social media places that we have available to us.
I was just wondering how we're going to pay for that.
And when we add it onto the agenda, I'd like public discussion to happen before decisions are made from council, so we have an opportunity to hear from the public on what their opinion is on this. Mr. Kingsept, there's been, word on the street, chickens are great in most cases unless you're a neighbor that doesn't want chickens next door to you. Is that being addressed at all within this ordinance?
Well, yeah, there are two ways to look at that. There's one that can take the strident view and say, I don't like chickens next to me because they squawk, they're loud, they're noisy, and they're going to attract vermin. That's one approach. The other approach is, if you like cats and dogs to be around your house, cats roaming, dogs barking, who are next door, then what is the big difference with chickens? Because you're assuming that they're automatically noisy and going to be disturbing. When in fact, and Heather gave me this information, the noise level of a chicken is extremely low. lower than dogs. So you can't answer that. It's an adjustment. And we're in a period where, as I said before, they're not barnyard animals anymore, they're pets. So it's an adjustment.
And one thing that I've said it in the past, it's important, the CDC really wants to know who has a flock of chickens, because if the bird flu ever mutates, they're planning on notifying everybody. So when I talk to individuals at the Michigan State Extension Center specific to fowl in the city, they said that was a very important thing, that we are certain on any birds that are being kept in Clawson.
That's a good point, and that's not clear in the ordinance, but it is something that you may want to put in, to the effect that whenever a state agency focuses on the, quote, registration identification of chickens appropriate as home pets, that the owners have to follow that regulation, and or the council adopts that resolution as part of the ordinance.
Did you address perhaps limiting the number of homes that can have chickens within the city?
I'm totally unqualified.
I doubt that. I seriously doubt that, but I did read other communities.
Some have 6, some have 9.
Right, I mean, I would say 3 would be great, like I want 0, but not because I don't like people's chickens, but I would want 0 because I don't want them in my backyard, I just don't. But I also know some communities limit the number of people when they're starting to allow something like this in the community. They limit the number of people who can even have them for a few years until they realize how well it works. And I don't think it's the animal that's really the problem. I would assume that it's most likely the property, the owner is going to be the problem. Now, if you have a neighbor that takes care of everything, you will not have a problem with the neighbor that has chickens. If you have a neighbor that cares only about themselves and not necessarily about the people around them, and those people do exist, then there's an issue. So can we also have a sign-off for the people, other than the people that currently have them, for anyone new that we would allow to have them, to have a sign-off from their neighbors to say, yes, I wouldn't mind this, just like you would if you were going to put up a fence?
Those are cogent questions, and I'm going to respond this way because this has always been my belief. If you're going to have a regulation like you've mentioned, then you have to have a rational public health, safety, and welfare fact basis or rationale behind that regulation. Let's talk about limitation. Right now, I cannot immediately think of such a justification for 1 versus 3 versus 4 versus 6. Could I, as a lawyer, contrive or create such one? Yeah, I probably could. But the factors in that might deal with proximity of house to adjoining houses and a lot width. Is it a lot width that may determine that? Is it the width of the outdoor yard where the chickens are going to be playing or whatever? I just don't know. But that's the standard I go by. So, I mean, it's legitimate to consider a number, and then tell the lawyer, figure out the rationale for it legally so you can support it. And I agree with that. That has to be done.
So who's going to police this? Because
Good question.
if you decide that there can be any number, there's no way someone's going to, well, we already have someone who has 9, right? And I don't know, she said she's very passionate about her chickens, and she gives up eggs to the people in the community, and children will starve without those eggs, according to her. Now, that's very benevolent, and it's great, but how do you know people aren't running a business with their chickens? How do you know? Like, you don't know. Like, a pet is generally someone that comes inside and you take care of.
How do you know someone's not breeding their puppies for puppy milk?
Well, I was going to say
I
that.
don't doubt some people are, but
Right.
if they're not, I mean, and those people, they're getting turned over really quickly, so you won't even know, right? You'll see them for a few minutes and then they're gone.
I mean,
'Cause there's a dollar
you do
associated.
have, quote, a local industry that does exist that might give you some lesson, and that is raising puppies and then selling them. That's done in many residential areas, not saying here. And so do you equate the number of chickens and then processing them and selling them above and beyond the limit you're allowed to the same way? Those situations, though, mostly come about by identification. of actual fact circumstances, which then requires Jim to be contacted, because he enforces these ordinances, and they send him over to try to find out the problem, and lo and behold, he doesn't have the facts there to support any complaint. That's the problem. Or you have a next-door neighbor that says there's a problem, and they're raising more than the number, and then selling them, and then you approach them, Jim approaches them and said, well, we'd like to talk to you. Would you be a witness and file the complaint? No, I don't want to, because it's my neighbor. Now, Jim's going to get up and give a rhetorical response.
Chickens it is.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of council. I have not seen the ordinance that John has drafted. The main complaints that we have coming in right now is ground feeding of the chickens, creating rodent harborage in the area, and rodents feeding on the chicken feces and the chicken feed that's left on the ground. And that's my major concern right now. I believe during your first meeting, you said, somebody said that they needed at least 3 chickens to keep warm in the wintertime. And then the location on the site, the location where I've received the most recent complaint, actually has it in their side yard, right up against the neighbor's driveway.
So your ordinance, though, takes care of that issue, because one of the requirements for getting a permit or whatever we're going to do is that you provide evidence of having a proper waste management system and a proper feeding system to keep rodents away from it. So I think that that's a good criteria.
The predicate of that, though, and I didn't show it to Jim because he will eventually get it.
On the internet,
but
you can just go.
The predicate to that is that Jim has to have someone in the department that's qualified in that area so they can actually monitor it.
I'm thinking that we may be able to use our aviary resource to do a little bit of training with our code enforcement people, and so that she has a degree in order to give some knowledge to our code enforcement people on what is acceptable and what isn't.
Training's only as good as those people are here, though, so I think it's more long-term efficient to set some standards for what that would look like. So you need to have, I don't know what you need to have, a box or a
certain
thing.
buckets or-
Right. To set some standards for what proper feeding and waste management is. And so then if we have those standards available, so if you want the permit, you need to meet these standards and show me your architectural box or whether you got to buy it or build it or whatever you're doing. Or as part of the permitting process, you allow someone to come and inspect that it meets whatever these standards. Then it doesn't matter. We could have 100 people come and go and you have the standards, right? So that might be a more long-term way to meet that need.
I guess I assumed that was going to be spelled out as far as, food can't be fed off of the ground. Food has to be in a, whatever.
No, that's true.
Doesn't food fly? Doesn't chicken food fly? Don't they eat it and then it goes places?
No, my aviary, my chicken coop in my backyard, I don't have chickens right now, but it's entirely enclosed with footing, wire walls, you can walk in it. Part of it is enclosed.
State your name and then start.
My name is Margaret Conroy. I live on Allen Street. I had 4 chickens for 5 years. No one ever knew I had them except for one of the city inspectors came to my house when we were putting up a new shed. And we didn't hide them. When we moved into Clawson, we asked them, we want to have an aviary in the backyard, and they said, yeah, it falls under the chicken coop law. You can build it. And we did. The cockatiels didn't work out, and we ended up getting chickens. They got West Nile virus, and they all died. So we did get chickens, and they were wonderful. Great pets, and like I said, no one ever knew we had them. My aviary was spotless. You would not want to eat eggs from a dirty chicken coop. And I was not going to feed them to my family, my neighbors, my children, my friends at work. And it was always clean. Waste disposal of chicken waste I don't know how anybody can say anything about it because you can buy it at the nursery and apply it to your lawn. Rats are not attracted to that. They are attracted to chicken feed. And my aviary is enclosed. The rats cannot get into it. I inspect it all the time to make sure they haven't gotten into it. Because there are rats in our neighborhood, a lot of them. But they're not coming from they never came from my chickens. There are thousands of people filling bird feeders, and those seeds are hitting the ground all over this city. And we all love our birds. And I don't know how you fight the problem. I don't know what the answer is.
So the criteria of having an enclosed feeding mechanism would be part of the permitting process then, so that it's not scattered.
Right, it will. And I think we've just found a resource that Jim and I can sit down with when we develop the waste management plan.
In a chicken coop, you would fill the chicken coop with pine shavings. Once a week, you're going to remove those pine shavings. They went out with my compost every week. No one ever complained. It was fine. I whitewashed the inside of my aviary with lime. There was never any odor. My grandchildren, 24 grandchildren, played with those chickens like a puppy. They sat on their lap. They were very sweet. And so I can see, I don't have one now, but I might want one again.
So to that end though, Paula, I feel like that would be the opportunity for if someone is complaining, they would have, because there's food scattered all over or there's problems, by setting a criteria for getting the permit and a criteria for having them, you have to have all the things we just said. To the extent that it's causing problems in the neighborhood, then that is something tangible that someone can complain about, saying, well, there's bird feed all over, so they're not following the contained feeding mechanism that we established. So it's not just she doesn't really love her chickens and she shouldn't have them. It's something tangible that they can point to. So to the extent that we make the regulation have specific points that need to be met, then that's the criteria for whether or not you can have them. You're meeting the points or you're not meeting the points, and your neighbor can complain you're not meeting the points, and then it's an issue. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, one of my other issues is we have a lot of other issues that we could use our building safety people on, and I don't really think, I doubt we're going to have hundreds of people who are going to say, I want a chicken in my backyard. I seriously doubt that'll happen, but.
They're a lot of work.
But to the same end, I talked to all my neighbors, and some of my neighbors, I've said this before, have been on our block since they built their homes in 1967 or whatever. They don't want neighbors. They don't want chickens in their backyard. Their perception is not that they are pets. Their perception is that they had them when they were growing up, and they all lived on farms, right? So farm animals and backyards that touch others. And it's not against the animal. It's not against the owner. It's about, I moved to a city, didn't move to a farm. Where's it going to end? And we have to address the where's it going to end thing if we go with chickens. And it's about resources, and it's about like who's more important. And I don't know, just establishing it. I just think if it already got voted in. I'm the only opposer. I get that, but I'm not the only opposer in the city. And I just think we have to be really stringent in setting this up so that it's contained, it's small, and then it perhaps has an opportunity to grow. So that one, our resources can adapt, and two, that we can just see what the interest is.
Mr. Haberman?
Yes, Mayor. One thing I like about the approach when you're talking about a permit process and, and a fee associated with that is in terms of enforcement, it's much easier from an administrative standpoint. Instead of having to go and issue citations and go through civil court, you just simply pull the permit, suspend the permit. Any suspension at an administrative level typically would require that if the applicant disagrees, they would then come to the council and appeal it. But I think as far as administering and dealing with enforcement and everything, this process is much easier than the current process you've got. And every place I've been where we've used permits for these types of things, we've found it much more effective in terms, and a lot easier, I think, on the staff and staff resources as far as, utilizing your resources. Because when I'm sitting there issuing citations, spending time, setting up court dates, going through a process that could take months and never makes anybody happy because the complainant's wondering when you're going to do something. This can be much more quickly administered, dealt with, and we just need to set, administratively, we set the standards in terms of, how many complaints before we finally say, guess what? We're pulling the permit, and you're just going to have to eliminate your, get rid of your chickens, period. And then I think the process is going to be much more effective, and I think it'll get better results, and I think more standardized usage of the permits.
We have one situation where the emotions are running high on both sides. We received a picture with a garbage can full of 9 dead rats that the neighbor has already killed. So.
Currently, we limit dog ownership to 3 dogs. And so there's some precedence for limiting the number of pets that somebody has. I'm comfortable with 3 chickens, maybe 4. I do know, in my opinion, this ordinance puts a lot of onus on the building department to develop standards. And I just wonder if that's the approach that we want to take. So I think we need to talk about that. It does not address food storage as such. Doesn't go into a lot of specific detail about how some of these things are to be handled. The location of the coop, the distance from the lot lines, that kind of thing. It's not addressed in this draft ordinance. And again, those things are placed upon the building department in your ordinance.
It wasn't intended at this point. Like I said, I think, as I said earlier, you need someone who's trained in this. And I think the thrust of this ordinance from the standpoint of revocation and enforcement is the breadth of detail on maintenance that's expected to be followed by the owner of the chickens. Because if those factors that can be easily identified are violated, then the revocation process can come into play. Now, you have the constitutional issue, and that is, I have the chickens in my backyard. He's inspected them before. I've followed the maintenance standards, but I decide, well, it's too much for me to do that weekly. And I've got houses on both sides where there are no driveways on the sides in those houses, and their backyard's behind me. So how is he going to detect the violation? He can't enter the property. He has no right to do that. So that is a situation where the neighbor has to then make a complaint.
Right.
And be forceful enough to tell the building department person, here's what's happening over there, inspect it. And then they can go and try to gain entry.
Wasn't there some discussion in this that we talked about, the part of getting the permit is you had to agree to having people access. Now, is there a constitutional problem with that? I think
now,
because of it being a new thing, because of a host of reasons, I think in the beginning, we might want that as an option. That they have to allow people to verify you have closed food sources, that you are following the waste management issues.
Your point is well taken.
So then how often?
But the argument is equal on both sides from the standpoint of weight of constitutionality. You have to demonstrate in your ordinance, if you're going to have an enforcement process and a detail on maintenance, you have to have some provision in there that there's a public health, safety, welfare factor that they recognize as essential, and that by virtue of having received the permit, the consideration they're giving for that permit is the allowance of the building or the enforcement officials to enter their property whenever it is suitable by providing them advance notice. So you've got to have a separate phrase that justifies that. So from the standpoint of constitutionality, when someone comes in and sues and says it's an improper entry, you have at least a legitimate fact basis that gives the justification for it as a standard. That's the key. That's why the maintenance of chickens and the property where they're housed is really the key to the whole ordinance.
Well, do you think that you can work with Ms. Peltonen again and get her recommendations on specifics on proper food storage options, that she can do a little bit of, I'll say, just because she's doing a community service, and, get that out there on the internet, and these are the type of approved containers. So some specifics from her so that we can get that.
I do
You can then get that information
I
into
do
the
believe she
next
can
form
help.
of the
Also,
ordinance.
I believe of the spokesperson tonight who appeared before us, just from her own experience, can help us as well. Because that also involves the structure itself, preventing rats from going underneath.
Can I ask a question? I have gone to extraneous
Is she authorized to ask?
Yes, please.
an extraneous process to make sure that my aviary was rat-proof. Yet I have a neighbor who has a garage that has no floor or foundation or footing, and it is full of burrows. And I'm wondering how can this, they are telling me that it was grandfathered in. The garage has been there for 40 years. So what is the answer to this? What is the answer to the solution to this rodent problem? I put video cameras on my house. I got in bed the other night and I'm watching my cameras on my yard and I'm seeing rats hop across my yard. It's very disturbing to me. What is the answer?
I think at this time, the chicken ordinance is where we have to focus on and not
I know.
I agree. There's,
So
the
you're
code
going to make
enforcement-
somebody build a special structure when you have a structure that is like that, that's just become home range?
Well, I think that if he ever was going to do any improvements to that, then it changes things.
Okay.
So when things change is when it starts opening up site plans and other ordinances possibly. So until, somebody pulls a permit, once they
To
pull
do
a permit on
something.
something else, then those sort of things end up being that they have to follow today's ordinances, and they're not
that's
grandfathered in.
probably
so.
never going to happen, but
So
thank you.
we were trying to do it the
I'm
right way
trying.
here.
I know, I understand. It's a dilemma. It's a terrible dilemma. So, but I don't see the chickens making it worse. As far as chicken feed, I never fed my chickens out on the lawn only because I didn't want other animals touching what my chickens might eat. But on my block, there must be 50 bird feeders that are spewing seed all over the place. And I got to tell you, on my cameras, that's where they were going. So I don't know.
Interesting.
And I've stopped putting feed in my seed in my feeders because that was it for me. It was like, whoa, what's going on here? So
I did the same thing.
yeah, but thanks for hearing me anyway.
I did want to also address Mr. Kingsep's idea that we do have a lot going on and that the chicken ordinance should be on the back burner. I think we're capable of moving forward with the chicken ordinance despite all the things we have going on. And then just to address the question, where does it end? We determine where this ordinance ends now, and we've talked about disallowing other fowl and that kind of thing. Things change over time, and some future council could open things up again or say no more chickens or whatever. So we determine where it ends for now with this ordinance. So.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
The next item on your agenda there, Mr.
Yeah, I want to
Kingsett?
combine two. It's engine braking ordinance and traffic and safety board ordinance. I had a report from the chief, and he basically presented this to them, and I was not at that meeting. because we assumed that it might get passed. But there was a concern by the board in connection with the alternate in engine and compression braking between the issuance of a civil infraction or an ordinance violation. And the purpose that's in there is if you have a repeated instance by a particular company whose trucks make the noise and it's not an infrequent occurrence, then you can get the prosecutors for this city in and issue a misdemeanor to send the message more. Infrequent, you issue citations. They also were concerned about acting upon signage, and I can clarify that probably by rewording, saying that they will consider certain signage that comes before them for request, providing the background information when they refer it to you so you have the rationale behind that. Because if someone comes in, like Kingsep, for instance, and says he needs a sign in his area due to his mental or physical disability, and I appear and I don't get it, that I at least have the right to immediately, when go before you, have the right to appear and address the issue, and if I don't like it, I can appeal from your decision. So I want to set up that mechanism. So I'll clarify that with them and get back with you on it.
Okay. Large lot ordinance update?
Yes, Jim and I have worked together on it, and you have before you, or you should, the ordinance with green highlights as well as yellow highlights, and those are basically the, and red, basically the considerations that we have had are referring to you for your review and input from the standpoint of your satisfaction. If you agree with this, then it goes to the Planning Commission. It will be revised, obviously, so it's in a different format, but the language is the same. The red omissions were initially made by Jim after our meeting and before in our discussion. Then there are green that he added in, and then there are the yellow that I added in for clarity, which were both in the purpose clause as well as the actual provisions dealing with the lot split exception in occurring. A map will eventually be made that will show the areas of the large lots as yellow and then the other areas in a different color, so there's a distinction.
I believe the copy that went in front of you had a couple of minor typos, misindents and stuff. So it's basically what we sent to you. It just needs to be adjusted a little bit. I was putting together a clean copy after I received John's version of this today. So we were trying to put together a clean copy, and then I was hoping to put together a cover memo explaining a commentary, explaining why the changes occurred and stuff. So if it's a little confusing, I realize it in the state it's in, but I wanted to show what we were taking out in the red crossed out lines and what we're adding in. And obviously what we're adding in can be tweaked also if it's not the council's will or the planning commission's will on those parts of the ordinance.
So would the process be you would update it and then send it to us for one more look, and then we would vote on sending it off to the planning commission?
First reading, is that, or does it just get sent to them after we approve it next month?
We would merely present it to you, just to see you're okay with it, and then our process would be to submit it to the planning commission for a first reading.
Okay.
Yeah, at your last council meeting, John committed to having it done before the first of the year,
Yeah.
so we fast-tracked
There
it.
you are.
But we appreciated it.
It was noticed. Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Mr. Altus. You may be back, but Traffic and Safety Board ordinance?
Right.
Or did you cover that? I don't think you did. Or did you?
Yeah.
Marijuana update.
Marijuana, that's on the agenda because a number of cities are doing this right now. And in fact, I have a meeting this Friday of the South Oakland lawyers to talk about the Marijuana Act. I mean, everyone is enthused that it's now passed. And of course, when that happens, everyone believes there's an instantaneous ability to do whatever you want to with marijuana, including growing it for recreational purposes in your basement. We've seen in the past where that occurs, where what happens is the humidity factor just ultimately destroys a house. And there's tremendous damage. In many instances, the house has to be torn down. And of course, no one can really start that growth until the regulations occur. And the regulations are estimated to be developed either toward the end of 2019 or in 2020. I mean, that's the latest. And we don't have any idea what those regulations will be under the new department that is now retitled to handle specifically marijuana and its consequences. So I developed this to at least give law enforcement some real authority to enforce the fact that it is not legal in general at this moment, and to try to give some backbone to the recognition that when the regulations come out, then you can do whatever you want to do with that. I was told that on the vote, the majority of people in Clawson approved it, and that's fine. That is fine. But I think we have to do it also in an orderly manner and be sure that you're satisfied that the requirements that come out of the state are reasonable, realistic, and applicable, and that you have local authority over some of that. Under the past act that the regulations were developed, which now went by the board, municipalities had some limited authority. I hope they'll have more authority under this new one, but we won't know for at least 18 months. So that's, I'm presenting it to you, and if you want to put that on the agenda as an action item for temporary purposes, I'm just giving it to you and letting you know what the context of the language would be. It's a business judgment. It's your call.
I think, can we talk?
Pardon me?
Can we make comments? 66.69% of Clawson residents approved Proposal 1. I think before we put anything in place that flies in the face of that commentary, we need to understand what the citizens are expecting to receive from their votes for Proposal 1. Maybe have a workshop and have a discussion, invite the community to express their opinions, but I'm opposed to putting any kind of statement or proposal in place that flies in the face of the citizens' votes.
I'm of the, we have to wait and see what the state regulations look like, and it's still illegal at the federal level. But at this point in time, just have to figure out what the state's going to do as far as regulations and restrictions, or how they're going to do it.
And that's fine too, as long as we don't do anything to contradict what the law or what the proposal.
Like I said, it's your call. It's a business decision on this one. I just posit the question.
Anyone else have any comments or thoughts on the marijuana subject?
Well, there's not much we can do because the state overrides whatever we're going to do.
I don't think they will do that totally. I think there will be local control.
State's going to want their money.
The state will get a lot of money from its state licenses on the warehousing, the transportation, and all of that. You'll get lower fees on that probably. But you don't know what's going to happen. They surprised us somewhat on the last regulations that gave us a little more authority than we thought we were going to get. So you don't know what's going to happen, really.
Okay, if there's nothing else,
Nothing else?
move on to the city manager's report.
If I may.
Really welcome Mr. Haberman.
Oh, thank you, Mayor.
First city council meeting, and
Yes.
glad you're here.
Mayor and members of council, I actually hadn't planned on discussing this, but I spent the last 6 months dealing with 10 applications for medical marijuana dispensaries, grow facilities, under the current regulations for medical marijuana, which are operating under emergency rules. Now, just to give you a little bit of background, medical marijuana was adopted by referendum in 2012. We were just starting the licensing process for these in June of 2018. So it took 6 years to get there. And LARA, who's the Licensing and Regulatory Authority, was operating under what they called emergency rules, which were court-ordered, and developing their new permanent rules, which still have not to this date been completed. They're anticipated to complete that in December, and then that will be, at that point, a permanent rules operation. Municipalities, we were getting $5,000 for a permit. But it took, we had 7 people on staff that met weekly dealing with these, walking them through the regulatory process, the local ordinance, just to get to the point where we were issuing a permit, which then allowed them to go to LARA. And then when they got to LARA, many times they were denied. There's, I believe, only a handful of dispensaries that have been approved to date, and I believe only 1 grow and 1 transport. And like I said, this was passed originally in 2012. I'm not going to contradict the city attorney. The fact is they do have experience now having had medical marijuana, so theoretically that process, as far as the regulatory part of the process, should be faster, given that they've already got a framework in place. The question between here and there is going to be, is there going to be litigation? Are there going to be suits filed? Which is what happened in medical marijuana. We had some state Supreme Court decisions. So 18 months, and as the mayor said, see how things shake out, I think is probably, this isn't a matter of going against the voters, it's just process. And having been down that road once and having been involved in the process, it's not going to happen overnight, and so I think it's better that we do take a wait and see, and that's not a slap in the face of the voters. It's just simply that if we start down a given path and Lara decides to come up with different regs.
Face the voters. Just to clarify, he was proposing an ordinance saying we weren't going to uphold it. That's
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm just reporting on my experience with this.
clarifying what
No,
we're talking about.
Okay, I haven't seen that, so okay, I get it. I just know that it can be a very lengthy process as we move forward. My first few days, I've been getting settled in, going through the different files, trying to determine where the information that I needed was. I started working on a report that I'm going to call Clawson Finances 2018, for lack of a better title. It's going to be a narrative form. It's not going to be a bunch of numbers and everything, and it's going to be more of a strategic or global view to present to the council what I believe are important things that you need to be aware of, and different options that are available as both for short-term and long-term financial planning, as far as where you want this city to go financially and how you want it managed, and what are going to be your revenue sources, and how we're going to structure some of our organizational and maybe in intercity, perhaps city cooperative agreements and different things that are available. I'm hoping to have that available to you probably in about 4 or 5 more weeks. I usually want to plod through this and double check my numbers and make sure that I fully understand what changes have occurred in the last 9 years here, and there have been some changes, and I think I'm getting a pretty good handle on it. So that's been my primary focus to date. I've been working on a few smaller projects, day-to-day things, and already met with the staff once, and I intend to meet with the staff about every 2 weeks, generally the week prior to a council meeting. I've always found it better to meet before the council meeting when we're looking at the agenda, because I found that meetings after council meetings turn out to be more of gripe sessions and we never really get anything done. And so I'd rather go and keep them positive and moving forward. So that's it. That's my report for tonight, Mayor. If there are any questions, I'd be certainly happy to answer.
Well, thank you.
I did have one question.
Yes, sir.
What is your sense as far as the need for a financial director? With Chris, our bookkeeper, operating more hours, how's your sense for that?
Right now, the current situation is going to work fine with me. You got to remember, I've been doing this for a lot longer, and the last community I was in navigated on the entire downside. So I got more involved in finances over the last 7 to 8 years than I had in the previous 15 years in this business. So my demand for services, in fact, in Fraser, I didn't have a finance director for the bulk of the time and trained 2 new ones. So, I got about the same services out of finance directors in those situations as I would get from Chris right now. We had a discussion. I'm fully comfortable with the current situation. I would say that as far as moving forward with the finance director, that would depend on what my successor's experience is with finance. If they are not real strong in finance, then I would say you would want a finance director. But keep in mind, getting a finance director, they're slim pickings too. It's a very difficult process to get one. But I don't, I think the new city manager down the line will probably be better able to make that decision. But for me, in the interim, status quo is fine. And as I mentioned in my report, I'm going to also defer on the administrative assistant. Again, I think that's a hire that should be made by my successor. If I need clerical help, I'll go ahead and get that. But Mr. Smith has been very helpful in terms of the agenda, which is typically what the bulk of your administrative assistant is involved in, assembly and those kinds of things. But communications, I very rarely relied on my administrative assistant to do that. I found it was more difficult to go and dictate, so to speak, a letter or anything. It was easier for me to just type my own letter. So I just generally do my own correspondence. So right now I'm fully comfortable with status quo.
Thank you.
I'll let the next guy spend the money.
Thank you.
Or gal, whichever the case may be.
Anything else? Thank you very much. City Clerk's report.
Yes, Madam Mayor and Council, I do have a few items to report. Tomorrow, we do have a meeting with the Renshaw residents. John, myself, and I believe I will bring Victoria in, since this will be kind of our first time meeting all of them. We're going to have kind of a general talk about questions and concerns, suggestions, input, things such as that. We will not be discussing the sale of the building. That has been a rumor that has gone around. That is not what we're discussing. That is not on the table. It is going to be merely just talking about things as our landlord-tenant relationships are and how we can move forward together and cooperate together and possibly discuss some of the management plans that have been presented to us and kind of see where we're at with things and work with them. Because I believe it's been about 5 years, I think, since we've had a formal meeting over there. So I think it's well overdue, as we've seen. So we'll be doing that tomorrow at 11 a.m. We're able to move the time because they had a senior luncheon, so we moved the time back so they could attend that as well. The Class C liquor license mailings were sent out. There is the public hearing that is prior to the general meeting on January 2nd, so that one will be at 6:30 for all of those. If there's any deficiencies or anything that were noted to all the businesses, they were notified of those, and hopefully will fix those. Paying taxes, water bills, anything like that. My office is in the midst of finishing up all the loose ends for open enrollment for all HR benefits. As we all know, it just passed, and so hopefully all that stuff will be effective January 1st. With these holidays, it's kind of tough, but we're going to get it all taken care of, so everyone will have the new information. And I believe tomorrow we are meeting with our benefits provider, Mr. Haberman, and myself will be meeting with them to kind of see what 2019 and beyond is going to have with a lot of our plans for HR, which is, LTD coverage, AD&D, and, eye insurance, health insurance, all of that stuff. So we'll be meeting with them to get Mr. Haberman up to date on all that stuff for the budgeting and things. Just another friendly reminder that the audit workshop will be prior to the January 15th council meeting at 6:30. Raina has been in discussions with myself, and that's when she says that's the best time. And I believe she said 6:30, so hopefully that time works for you. She generally needs about 45 minutes. I know Mr. Haberman has talked to her as well in figuring out kind of where we're at with that stuff, but that's where we'll be. I did have a meeting with Jackie Johnson from the Clawson School District. Victoria and I met with her to discuss their proposed non-homestead Headley override millage that will be on the May election. So we're trying to work together to get things clarified and publicized accordingly and within legal requirements, so residents know how we can work together and the costs and kind of things like that. So we did have a great meeting about that, and we'll continue to have those meetings over time. They have not had the language actually approved yet, but we are suggesting that they come to council once the language is actually adopted by the attorney, so you know, and so the general public knows and everything, what the actual language is going to be, because it is going to be, according to what she stated, it will be a small increase, but then also an override, so it's going to be kind of a mutual kind of language in there that's going to be a little interesting because of the Headley override and Prop A, so that's kind of why they're going out for that. So we'll continue with that, and we'll post you any information on that, and we're going to kind of work together on that situation. So just another friendly reminder that City Hall offices are, of course, closed December 24th, 25th, 31st, and 1st. So due to the holidays, due to the contractual obligations for the holidays. Winter taxes and water bills, that's always a question that comes up because of those times. You can pay online, and there is a drop box that's out there in the entrance area, so you can drop that. So if it's after that deadline, we will process them the next day we're open, which is the Wednesday. But a lot of people, of course, want to get that on their taxes before December 31st. So your best, if we process it the next day, it will, of course, you won't be able to file it because it'll be in 2019 when we process it. So make sure to get it in. It's going to be very busy December 26th and 27th here, but you can also pay online, just FYI. And the last thing is the city manager RFP was posted on the website and online in the Oakland Press, and I've already been asked by, I think it was about four agencies for the RFP, just so you know. So I haven't received them back yet, but they did respond to me, so it did get out there into the interwebs, if you will. So that hopefully more agencies will, and the deadline is the 27th, so it is out there on the website. So just once that is there, that will be on the agenda January 2nd to decide which firm we would like to go with the city manager process to kind of expedite that process over the next few months. So that is all I have.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for Mr. Smith? Okay. Unfinished business. Are there any unfinished business items? Or new business? I'd like to open the floor up for public discussion. Public discussion is now officially open. Come to the microphone, give your name and address. No one? Public discussion is now closed. The next item on the agenda is consideration of moving into closed section to discuss attorney-client privileged communications in accordance with MCL 15.268H.
Madam Mayor, I move the meeting move into closed session to discuss attorney-client privileged communications in accordance with MCL 15.268H.
Support.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Milan,
Yes.
Councilmember Moffett,
Yes.
Councilmember Elbrick,
Yes.
Mayor Woolley, Councilmember Harris.
Yes. Madam Mayor, before we go, could I,
Yes,
I know
please.
last time we messed up, we couldn't even say Happy Thanksgiving to everybody, because we went into closed session. We're doing it again tonight. I'd like to wish everybody and the whole community Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and have a safe New Year.
Support.